Hey everyone, today on the podcast, we have our good friend Craig Baldwin. He's the co founder and partner at Upsourced Accounting that helps provide robust financial services for creative agencies. Before Upsourced, Craig had experience in the consulting space, worked with VC backed startups, worked in the Internet of Things IoT space, and he's built several other ventures, both high tech and low tech. So we're really excited to have him on today and hear about his story. How you doing, Craig?
Good. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Lauren. Happy to be here.
Man, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. So to get started, let's start with your backstory. Like, how did you go through all those interesting phases? What did that look like? What were some of the bumps along the way and some of the highlights along the way?
Oh, still waiting for the highlights, I guess. I've taken a very circuitous path to where I am today, and I'm sure where I'll even be in the future. Um, I I come from a family of high school teachers. In fact, everyone on any side of my family that actually has a college degree, they've been teachers, public school teachers.
Huh.
And so at a very young age, I felt like, well, I love that about my family and would say that if it's even possible genetically, I could probably do the same and be good at it. But I just wanted a career that would provide for probably more monetary rewards than teaching. And in my small little town that I grew up in, which is called Middletown, Ohio, it was primarily a steel town, and there weren't a lot of wealthy people there. It was very blue collar. The only people I knew that lived in homes that were anywhere remotely close to $300,000 were accountants. And that was really just
Mm.
because they were people that my parents knew and I hung out with their kids. Right. And so there was a gentleman in town who was a partner in an accounting firm. And I just thought, well, if there's any way to be rich, this is, your very naive young brain. Well, accounting is that's my ticket. Like that's how I'm going to get rich. And so when it came time to pick a major in college, that's what I picked. I picked accounting, not really thinking about if it was something I was inherently good at or cared about or really anything other than like, yeah, I can do that. And yeah, I should probably make some money and maybe I can have at the time, a $300,000 house, which is like impossible to find as a starter home now. But so that's how I started in accounting. I worked at Deloitte and Touche for about a year and a half as an auditor, which is kind of like the ideal track for an accounting major. And let me tell you, man, I made some pretty bad life choices there because I didn't like it at all. It was horrible. Um, and I've always had a really big problem with authority,
Mm.
not in that like I act out or I'm hard to control. It's just I've never liked being told what to do, and many people have that natural inclination, but especially when it's someone I don't respect. And thankfully for me as a parent, I have three small children, and they have the same gift and curse, unfortunately. But I knew I wanted to get out and
Mm.
had an opportunity to go work at in house at some places in their accounting departments in DC, and just decided I need a hard life reset. And so I actually just put in my 2 weeks and I left Deloitte. And I always wanted to work in a restaurant, and so I went and applied at a restaurant. It was kind of comical going to many different restaurants and applying for jobs and people saying, well, you've never had experience in a restaurant. I don't think you can do this job. I remember one guy telling me like, we have over 10 craft beers on our menu. Like, I don't know if you can remember all those. And in my head, I'm thinking like, dude, are
Oh
you
gosh,
serious? Like,
humbling.
I, yeah, like I'm college educated and, I worked at a really good firm and like, I think I'm somewhat intelligent. Like, what have I done? Right. So through that, a former coworker at Deloitte who had also left decided that he wanted to start a firm of his own. Didn't know how well defined that was, but I thought, you know what, that's perfect. I would love to be involved. Like I've always wanted to just kind of craft my own thing or take my own path. But the deal was that I made with him is that I wanted to help with marketing and sales. I just felt like my personality lended itself
Mm.
better to marketing and sales. Now, again, very naive because I didn't really know anybody in marketing and sales. I just thought like I like to talk to people. So those people are in marketing and sales, right? Like, yeah, I'll do
Yeah.
that. So we made that deal and started Upsourced at the time, Upsourced Accounting in 2012. After I'd been at Deloitte for a couple of years, and I was waiting tables and bartending at night just to barely pay rent. I did so many weird odd jobs just to be able to afford rent. I remember I like moved wood floors. I gave golf lessons a couple times. I'd posted like ads on Craigslist because I grew up being a golfer, and I was like, well, this, maybe I can make some gas money, which I did. I was just kind of doing whatever I could to keep things going, and really just in a state of learning and trying to apply whatever marketing and sales was supposed to be to, at the time, what we were doing was using what was new cloud-based accounting GL software. It was really sexy stuff, and servicing small businesses, like any small business at the time in the Columbus, Ohio area, and way undercharging them for that service. So we were charging
Mm.
$99 a month. We would reconcile all their transactions and we give them monthly financial statements. So like people call that bookkeeping, right? That's basically bookkeeping. That's what we were doing.
Mm.
And the whole idea of marketing and sales was really like, okay, well, when it comes down to it, can you get people to buy this? Because we had no
Mhm.
clients. Yeah, we had a professional background in accounting, but Deloitte doesn't really mean anything to the average person.
Yeah,
And that type of accounting, or in our case, auditing, is dramatically different than bookkeeping, right?
sure.
And so, what did I learn about myself through that period? Well, honestly, I learned about myself that like doesn't really matter what the educational background is or how much I know about a topic or what the heuristics say. Can you make it happen or can you not? And so that's kind of been a theme throughout my career and really my life is like, I don't care how it's supposed to be done or how you think it should be done. Like, I'm just going to go do it. Right. And so that first year, after many, many, many lunches and coffees and meetings and phone calls and cold emails, you name it, the tweaks to the website, we had added probably 20 to 25 clients that were paying us a
Wow.
couple $100 a month to do their accounting. And so that kind of felt like a success to us, although we weren't actually taking any money from the business. So it wasn't really that successful. And, but it was a great training ground. And so we did that for about a year and a half. It continued to grow. I think we did almost $200,000 of revenue in the very first year, which was really
Wow, that's
shocking in
great.
retrospect.
Mm.
And through that experience, we realized like, man, it's hard to be efficient at this work. We weren't really willing to outsource it, although we were using some sort of like virtual assistant services to help, and just thought there's got to be a better way. And so we started taking money from that business and we invested it into a product or a piece of software really that we were going to use internally to help us be more efficient. I don't think that
Mm.
was a very good idea, by the way, but we did that.
Mm.
And fast forward like another 6 months, and a friend of ours told us, "Hey, you should make that piece of software its own business." And we thought, very naive, sure, like let's do that. Yeah, why? Like everyone's starting a startup now in Columbus, Ohio. At the time, there were not many people doing that, but it looked really cool and interesting and sexy. And when I think back to growing up and having, I would say that money played a pretty big role in my life, in that it was the root of a lot of sort of negative emotions.
Mm.
Being a young person, I just felt, well, if I can make a lot of money quickly, like I can solve all problems, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, talking about things you learn when you're young, I thought, oh my gosh, yeah, this is it. This is the accelerated path to solving all of life's problems. And I didn't even care what the vehicle was. I just wanted to do that. And so we did take that piece of software, we applied to a number of accelerators. And this was in 2013, and got into one in Cincinnati, Ohio called the Brandery, which at the time was a top 10 in the country,
Sure.
and we
Yeah.
got in. There were 1,000 ideas or companies that applied. They accepted 10. And next thing I know, we had to move down to Cincinnati and figure out how to build software for real, because we weren't really doing it yet, and understand if there was a viable market opportunity for this kind of Frankenstein thing we were trying to build. And it just set off a whole chain reaction of events that we kind of left the accounting firm behind. Eventually, one of our partners stayed behind to run it. Thank God he did. And myself and the gentleman I worked at Deloitte with, we worked on the software company. And then one thing led to another, and we couldn't get off those train tracks. And we raised about $1 million in venture and hired a team. And next thing you know, what was me trying to figure out how to do sales and marketing, i.e., calling people and trying to get coffees and lunches, was me trying to build a very scalable marketing approach to get meetings for our SaaS product, our enterprise SaaS product, and close deals over the internet. Right. And so it was like a very accelerated education in terms of sales and marketing.
Mhm.
Some things we did very well, some things we did not. But ultimately, our one of our Achilles heels, maybe the biggest, is we just had no idea how to build software. Neither of us came from a software
Mm.
background. We burned through 4 CTOs in about 2 years, and while we tried really hard to compress those learnings, we were never quite compelling enough for the marketplace with our solution, and our execution was not particularly good. And so, even though at the end of all this, we were in diligence with Intuit for like 6 months, and very naive again, I thought, oh my God, they're going to buy us. We're going to make a bunch of money,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
somehow, despite all odds. Like that was, you talk yourself into this kind of, I guess people will call it survivorship bias. But when many good things have happened in a row, you just think like, well,
It's gotta happen.
yeah, it's destiny, right? It's fate. And
Mm.
so what ended up happening actually is Intuit pulled out after 6 months and decided to basically release a very similar product for their tax application they have. And they
Mhm.
had
Brutal.
stolen all the custom iconography that we had built in our application. And of course, there was nothing we could do about that. And I'm sure they were going to make much
Wow.
better use of that solution than we would have, anyways. And so they were certainly intelligent enough to know that we had no real product and no real business, and they could just do it better themselves, and they did.
Yeah.
And so
Mm.
at that point, my partner and I, and maybe this is a Midwestern thing, but we decided in good faith we could not raise additional capital. It was really hard to look at our investors and tell them that they would receive their money back, let alone outsized returns. So in 2015, we made the really gut wrenching decision to shut down that business. Originally, that business had started off as a crew, and then through the brand process, we changed the name to Squirrel. Kind of like the idea was going and fetching external documents, really, really
Mm.
easy stuff. But at the time, it was like, okay, if that's what the marketing agency says we should do, they know better than us. But shut that down in 2015 and let go of our team of, God, we probably had 7 people, 6 to 7 people, give or take. And when you're in your mid 20s and you're from the Midwest and you grew up in a really blue collar town, man, that sucked. Like it really bothered me having to tell people that I failed them by way of letting go of them,
Mm.
Yeah.
by way of telling investors they would not receive their money back after I felt like it was a huge leap of faith for them to trust us. And that was an experience that really kind of changed everything for me personally. I can't speak for my partner, although I'm sure he would probably agree. And I just decided that after that, I was no longer going to play a very short term game. I was not looking
Yeah.
for outsized returns in a compressed timeline. And in fact, I'd be the first to admit I don't think I really have the skill set for that. I mean, I'm not, I don't come from an engineering or software or mathematical background. I had no experience in that industry at the time. I have a lot of it now. But I'm not going to build the next Silicon Valley startup. I'm just not. I don't have access to special things that the people who do that and do that well have access to, whether that's
Mhm.
inherent to them or near them, right?
Mhm.
But one thing I was pretty sure about, and I still kind of maintain today, is that if you give me a much longer timeline, or really enough time with any given topic, I can be better than anybody else in the world at it. And that's not because I'm especially smart. I'm a very average probably, but I have like an outsized tolerance for pain. Like I'm willing
Mhm.
to drag myself through the mud and bang my head against the wall more than probably anyone you've ever met. That's the only skill that I have in life, is that, right? And because of that, if you give me 10 years or 20 years to build something great, whatever that something is, or to compete at a certain thing, I like my odds, right? And so through that experience, I just totally reset my mindset, and personal life changed quite a bit as all this was happening. And I had children, and then I got married, and was we had our family, and I needed to provide for that family, and of course my wife
Yeah.
does as well. But I couldn't go back into the startup world, and I couldn't even go back to the accounting firm, to be honest. It just wasn't big enough to support my family. And so I started down this path of, okay, if I started another software company, or if I started another business outside of the accounting firm, what's going to make me really dangerous? Again, very long time horizon. Like I'm trying to prepare myself. I'm looking to learn the things that I didn't have time to learn when I had my own business. And so that's why I went and worked at an organization called Rockfish, which was a part of WPP. It was a digital innovation agency, and worked as a director of strategy there. I was very fortunate to have that role. I worked with great people, and an old investor had actually hired me to work there. I then wanted to get back into tech with a crew in Cincinnati who I really adored and thought they built some of the best products ever. And I wanted to see that firsthand because I such a poor job on my half of trying to do that. And so that's when I worked at Losant. That's when Derek and I actually met
And
in the
that's
IoT
when we met you,
space.
right? I didn't even
That's
know
right.
you had an accounting background for years. Like,
Yeah, you would
because
never know, right? Yeah,
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 you,
yeah.
you talked the software space so well. And what's fascinating about from the time when y'all started your first software business to now, the level of tools, the level of revision control, the level of having multiple people work on individual pieces of software, the way microservices architecture rolled out, like
So
people take
different.
that for granted now. 2016. Like that's
Yeah.
when that started. That's when that kind of thing started. And before that, it was a completely different world that made the gap between launching something demo grade and production grade vast, right?
It was huge. Yeah. Like I in retrospect, I could tell so many crazy stories about things that went wrong. Like when we were on our, I guess maybe our third CTO, he had taken what was basically a demo application that we were using for demos and to get customers, but like it wasn't deployed anywhere. Like we were running it locally, and he was like, well, there's this new thing called Amazon Web Services. I think I can host it there. He's like, but I've never done that before. So we like had to call a bunch of people for them to teach him how to deploy this product to, basically a server that other people could use it on, right? Like that was a huge thing that we're like, well, we don't know either, but like we'll figure it out, right? And then when we went to go launch the product at the same time, this guy who was kind of a he was an interesting dude to say the least, had written this post on Reddit that went crazy viral. He posted it was a post about 4th of July like recipes, and he posted like a really cheeky potato salad recipe, and it went insanely viral. And he ended up on like Good Morning America and like all this
Wow.
crazy stuff. So as
Yeah.
we launched the product, he was like, I'm sorry guys, but like I'm getting all these media calls, like I can't be around. So it was like, what? Like we at that point we were paying him, like he was a part of the team. We had other team members, and it was just like, how is this happening right now? And so we had so many of those moments. And again, when you have a high tolerance for pain, you're just like, we'll find a way, we'll find a way, we'll find
Mm.
a way. But
Yeah.
eventually, I think one of the other really important things I learned through that experience is eventually you have to call time out. Like, not everything is possible. Not everything is worth your time. Not everything will justify what you think the ROI will be, right? And so just knowing when to say when was really important. It was really damaging to, I don't know, my ego or my sense of self in some ways, but was certainly the appropriate decision in retrospect. And so, but yes, all that to say, like, holy moly, I learned a lot about software development in a really short period of time. And when I worked at the IoT company, like those guys were first class when it came to developing enterprise grade, highly scalable software. And that just really gave me an accelerated education to not only understand how to build it, but to go out at the enterprise level. And this is really where I had my first kind of like enterprise sales role, where I would go out and,
Mm.
pitch this product and negotiate terms and manage contracts and go through months and months and months of negotiation, sometimes years of negotiation, just to get like $100,000 deal or $200,000 deal. And obviously that's when I met you. And again, that was a very accelerated education, and not only software development, understanding what it means to build a great product that is viable in the market. But for me, it was really about enterprise sales and everything that comes with that. And how do you manage those relationships, and how to be
Yeah.
effective at doing that, how to manage a team, right? Like I'd done a lot of prospecting. I could send cold emails with the best of them, but I couldn't like wine and dine an executive or an enterprise architect in Silicon Valley. That was completely new to me. And so I had to figure out how to do that. And Losant really afforded me that opportunity. And, I eventually moved on to the consulting world. But all this time, I was just trying to make a buck, really. I was trying to learn a lot while also making a buck to keep
Well,
my family afloat. And all the while, the accounting firm was kind of growing in the background.
Yeah, I was actually just kind of listening to your story at the very beginning where you grew up in a family of teachers and you're like, I don't, I want something that can maybe make me a little more cash. So you took a job or you started down a career path that was going to achieve that goal. And then you got the job that could probably do that and then hated it and then
Yep.
left.
Yep.
And then it sounds like another series of like, hey, how, and then with the SaaS product, it's like, all right, this is going to really scale. This is going to be the thing that's going to make me all that money that I wanted that maybe I didn't get through my audit job.
Yep.
So then you went into there and then like, it seems like when things started to really pick up is when you slowed down and said, oh, what my skill set is, what I'm actually really amazing at is having this high tolerance for pain and like the ability to endure over time and to slow down and learn all these things. That's actually what's going to make me more dangerous. But did you at the time sort of understand that, or like after sort of trying to make more money really quick, or more quickly than taking the slower approach? Or is that something that you looked at in retrospect and was like, oh, that's actually how I should have done it?
The willingness to have to play a very long-term game. And I
Mhm.
think I've never read this book, but people talk about this book. Like Warren Buffett has this book called Snowball, and he talks about
Mhm.
playing, when you look at Berkshire Hathaway, how it's been around for, over 50 years, and how he plays a very long-term investing game. That really resonated with me after we shut down Squirrel. Because I just in my mind and in my gut, I never wanted that feeling again. I never wanted to have to felt feel, excuse me, that level of failure by way of having to let go of an entire team of people
Yeah.
at my own doing and telling a group of investors. And, to be fair to my investors, or our investors, I should say, I don't think most of them really cared. Like, it's a part of the VC model. They're going to have losses, right? But some of those people I knew very personally, and I took losing their money very personally. And while even to this day, I remain really good friends with some of them, and they have done more for me than I could probably ever do for them. And I still don't know why they've done anything for me. I hate letting people down that I do like and that I do respect. And that really gnawed at me. And so it wasn't until right after that that I realized, like, okay, I got to reset here. I can still win at something. I can still be successful. I can still make money even, but I have to have a really long time horizon because I am not going to be able to do it in a compressed period. And so that's when I really said to myself, okay, if you were to start over again, and maybe you start another software business, or maybe you start another low tech company, what are the skills that you wish you could have learned in a more friendly environment that aren't as high stress?
Mhm.
um, what are the jobs that would facilitate that? And so that's what I
Mhm.
did really over the next kind of like 6 to 7 years, is while I was just trying to make a buck to keep the family going. And again, props to my wife because she did the exact same thing. She always has. But I wanted to learn valuable experiences that would make me better towards that end goal. And when you think about things through a 10-year time horizon, taking jobs for the next 6 to 7 years is really not that big of a deal. I have
Hmm.
no regrets about that. It was that for my period of life was really important for my family, but also facilitated some of the best learnings I could ever get outside of running my own business. And now it's kind of comical that I'm back in Upsourced all these years later, full time, and I just feel like and I should be careful when I say this, but I feel like I'm like a major leaguer playing in the minor leagues now because
Mm.
like
Got it.
everything is like I have all those learnings. Like the stuff we talked to our team about, like I was doing 6 and 7 years ago, and I was messing up all the time. Like I've just been through so many things, and I think we all have those moments in our career where we feel the same. Is that I've taken on and screwed up more things than most things, most challenges people at our company have ever attempted. Like I've done it all. You
Yeah.
name it, I've screwed it up. I've never actually solved anything right the first time, but I will screw it up, and I'll screw it up a bunch of different times to understand like every angle possible. And then on like that 15th time, I'm gonna get it right, but I'm gonna get it like really right. That's just how I work. It's very instinctive in that way. And that's the other reason why kind of, I would say that business ownership or entrepreneurship works well for me because I'm just not traditional. I was never going to fit into a corporate model where things are to be done a certain way and you have to win a popularity contest.
Mm.
That's just not who I am. Like, I have my own way of doing things. It will be just as effective, I promise you, but you're not going to want to look at it while it's going on. Like, it's ugly, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so it's just not
Well,
fit for the corporate environment. And I think knowing yourself, knowing your skills and your strengths and your weaknesses, but as I've aged, the more that I understand myself, the easier life has become. It's been less about the external things. It's been more about understanding myself as a person and what I'm capable of and what I'm not capable of. And it makes applying oneself that much easier in any given situation. And it's amazing how I feel probably stupider in some ways than I ever felt, because I'm way less working in the external side of the world. I'm studying less. I'm learning less sometimes, but I feel in some ways more dangerous than I've ever felt. And that's because I just know myself a lot better. And I think
you,
we all have those moments throughout our career.
you made the comment about like feeling like a major leaguer in the minor leagues, and it's because you've had so many experiences that you've seen a different stuff from different angles. And like my mom always has a saying, she's like, you don't think to look behind a door unless you've stood there. She used it in a different context, basically like she'd catch us doing shit all the time or sneaking out, and she just always knew, and other parents didn't. But we were probably closer in age than maybe some of the other parent kid combos. So, and she did all that shit, so it was really hard for us to get anything past her. But to your point, like once you've experienced all that, like you know which doors to look behind because you've stood there, you've seen it before, which makes you really a lot more effective. And again, that resilience of just being able to push through failure after failure, um, to avoid the slog of being in corporate world. And we talked about this offline a little bit about like, what's the last thing you changed your mind about? And like the last major thing I changed my mind about is that working extremely hard in corporate America will get you promoted. Like that
Mm,
was like the last thing that like really snapped in my brain. That was like, hey, look, if you work really, really hard and you do a great job, you're gonna, the meritocracy of it will elevate you.
yeah.
I have
I think you just
completely
have to be
changed
well
my view.
liked. I
Yeah,
think you
it's
have
like
to be well
it,
liked.
if you do good work, you are
Yeah.
rewarded with more work. If
Yeah.
you
In the
don't do
same
good
role.
work, what's that?
I was gonna say in the same role often,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. Exactly right.
they're not gonna
Yeah,
promote you. They want you to keep doing that job very well.
but if you're likably incompetent, you get rewarded with more resources to accomplish those roles or those
Yeah.
jobs. Like
Yeah.
that's been my change in perspective over the years.
I also
Yeah.
think you said something interesting, Craig, when you were talking about, looking at things on a 10-year horizon and like taking maybe multiple jobs and slowly getting these skills. Doesn't seem so bad if you have that,
Mhm.
that perspective. But I do think in startups and when people start their own business, it's really hard to like have that patience, and then to not be maybe swayed by what they see other people doing on social or what other people are putting out there. So what advice like would you give for maybe someone who's similar to you and that like they want to do really, really well, they want to start this business but they're feeling like the timeline isn't there, like 10 years seems so far, like seems like a million years. What advice
Mhm.
would you give uh people starting their business with that mindset?
I wouldn't necessarily um, try to persuade someone not to pursue something, especially a young person. I think
Mhm.
all young people tend to be pretty impatient, myself being one. And
Yeah.
I think that no matter what, they're really valuable learning experiences that can come from just saying like, let's try it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think they'd probably save themselves a lot of pain and suffering if they would be more patient, try more things, have a longer time horizon, maybe not raise venture capital and just try to find some customers first. I had there was a lawyer in town who's pretty well known in Cincinnati. And I don't know if I'd call him a mentor, but he took me out to breakfast once before we raised the initial seed round, and he said, Craig, and he meant this in a very genuine way. He goes, I just want you to know that like you're going to take this money and you're going to put yourself on a train track that you can't get off
Mhm.
until you sell the business or you go out of business. And he goes, I just want you to understand what that means and the ramifications of that. Now, at the same time, I, for 2.5 years, had no real paycheck, was living literally day to day in many cases. We still weren't paying ourselves from the accounting firm. We weren't paying ourselves at the software company, even when we were at the accelerator. And so in the back of my head, I was thinking like, I do not care how painful this is. I just need enough money to put gas in my
Yeah.
gas tank, right? Like I was like, yeah, whatever. I don't care. Like, let's do it. Right. But in retrospect, I knew exactly what he was saying, and he was absolutely right. And I think that there are certain individuals through ways of their own talent or those around them, or they have the right product at the right time with the right market, which tends to be really, really important, right? Um, that can be successful in a compressed time frame. But I think we
Hmm.
all know stats around startups and venture-backed startups and how challenging it is. And I look out now with like the AI scene, and it's funny too that like everybody has a startup now. Like when I was doing
Yeah.
it, not to sound old and stodgy, but it wasn't like everyone was doing it. I mean, it was hard. It was really hard to find investors, especially in the Midwest. It was really hard to raise capital. Not everyone was doing it, and which was probably easier for me in that regard. Now everyone has a startup, and everyone's working on something, and everyone's raising money, but like it's such a crowded space, and it really what ends up making is these kind of markets and segments so crowded that like how do you tell one from the other? Like, what's so special about your business? Like, I think people get so infatuated with just like, being into music and I made a mixtape and will you listen to it? Like, that's kind of what startups have become. And it's what we've lost from that is like, what's the quality of your business? Like, what's the quality of your service? What's the quality of your product? Do people actually care about it? Are they going to pay for it? Right. We've just become so infatuated with the lifestyle surrounding um, these ventures and even owning, running funds. Everybody and their mother has a fund now. And
Mhm.
it's always interesting to me that people talk about the money they've raised for the fund. I never hear about the successes, and I'm willing to bet it's
Yeah.
because they don't have very many. It's weird, but I think that's kind of what a lot of like popular culture in life has become is we're all living these lifestyles for the broader audience, but what lifestyle are we living for, the people we go home to see every day?
Yeah.
And I'll be the first to tell you, and Derek can probably comment on this too. When you have small people in your house, like you realize pretty quickly that's really the only thing that matters. The only people that I really have to answer to each and every day are my wife and my three small children. And other than that, I don't really care about the lifestyle. And so maybe it's just kind of like had to get to that phase of life to feel that way and to have that long time horizon. And I'm totally willing to
You
accept
got to
that.
turn 35. Like, I think
Yeah,
that's what has to
you got
happen.
it's natural. And I think a lot of us listen, these things happen for a reason. These phases happen for a reason. But that at the end of the day, I need to be able to control what's going on in my home, my little corner of the world before I can change the whole world. Before I thought I could change the world, and it's laughable to think about how naive that thought was. You can't change the world unless you can control your own little neck of the woods, right? And most people can't.
And you're talking about this, like how cool it's become to have a startup, and everyone has a startup. Lauren and I talked about this probably just right after we met with you. That's when it started to become trendy. It was like
Yeah.
2017, like it was trendy to put like founder. And the thing is like for the first 10 years, to your point, being a founder is not as much fun as you think. Like I used to think I really loved like the hustle and the struggle and like the ideation and like the product ownership part of it. And as I get older, I'm like, that that's hard. That's really hard. And it's not. And now, like what people are doing for the startup world is they're taking a large language model, they're wrapping their product over top of it, and then they're trying to raise as much funding as possible, saying they're using a deep neural network. And it's like, but you didn't do that. Like you
Right.
didn't build that thing. You're providing a service, right? You're not a product, you're a service. And I think like that Rabbit R1 product and then that pin from Human or Humane, like that was kind of an emperor's new clothes moment for that
Mm,
startup world. It's like they raised big boy money, like 9 figures worth of money, and it's gone like
it's crazy.
overnight, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, and we kind of saw that with the crypto craze as well, right? Like it's never been easier to go out and say that you have something and to kind of do something with it or raise money, I guess, namely.
Mhm.
But I think the flip side of that is it's never been more challenging to build a real business. Because there's so many people trying to do it, especially now we're in a market environment which is not nearly receptive. I think the other thing too that we're all going to look back on is that the years between like 2011 and 2020, like basically right before the pandemic, and even including the first couple of years of the pandemic, because we were just awash with money, like Well, I don't think we'll ever see that type of boom cycle ever again between technology, what happened with the internet, social media, cloud computing, and zero interest rate phenomena that were basically happening
Yeah.
everywhere. Um, we're never going to see that again, in my opinion. I mean, it never say never, I guess, but that was such a special time where anything was possible and you could start things. And now it's just, I don't know. It's perverse now. It's different. It's weird. It's like all that's caught up, and there are too many of these people who think they can do anything, but
Mhm.
they're going to hit a much tougher environment than we had, especially from a capital perspective. And so I think it's going to be a much more challenging. Not only is it obviously much more challenging to tell who's real or not at the outset, but over the longer term, I think it's gonna be a lot harder to build a real business than it used to be because there's so many businesses who are just not valuable at all, and everyone's competing for a smaller amount of resources. But I don't know. Maybe that's just because I'm an old man now,
I tend to
which I'm willing
agree.
to
It's like,
accept.
what are you doing to make sure that outsourced for the next 5 years has that level of growth of building a good business and not experiencing the fate that we're talking about here of, crummy businesses that come
Well,
and go.
yeah, I mean, and that's why honestly, Upsource is like the perfect business for me now because I just believe in nose of the grindstone, day in and day out, month in, month out, quarter over quarter, year over year, decade over decade. I mean, we talk about my partners and I talk about like the next 30 years with this business. And I have a very strong commitment, whether they believe it or not, to our team and the people that work with us. One of the employees we actually had at the software company, when we let him go, we hired him at the accounting firm, and now he runs sales for me at Upsourced, and he's been there for almost 10 years, I guess now, 9 years. And, those are the things that matter to me personally, way more than even the financial rewards. Like this idea that we have an opportunity to change people's lives for good, or if anything, give them a space to be successful in. Ultimately, we all have to prove it, right? But just having this vehicle via Upsource, this business, so my goal every day is just not to mess that up. Like I want it to get a little bit better, a little bit bigger, and continue to provide for more talented, motivated people to come into our little environment and be successful, build their skills, make money, build families and lives, right? Like that's really what motivates me. And it really wasn't until I'm probably oversharing at this point, and I've told this to a couple people, but my best friend growing up all the way through college passed away. He got ill when he was in his mid 20s. He had cancer, and for the last couple years, really the last year that he was going to his treatments all the time, he went to his treatments in Columbus where our business was, and he couldn't hold a full-time job because of how frequent his treatments were. And so he actually worked part-time at Upsource. He had a finance background, and he was doing bookkeeping. Again, not sexy at all, but he did it. And I'll never ever ever forget being with him in hospice and him apologizing to me on one of his last days that he didn't get all his work done.
Mm.
And that was another really, it was right before I had my first child. And it was just such a telling experience that I have been so focused on all these other things that don't really matter, and providing a place for people to have a sense of self and meaning and grow. Those things matter way, way more. And if you can provide an environment, or in our case, a business, for that to take place, I don't have to do that much personally, right? Like I just have to not mess it up. But our success comes from our team, and our ability to bring in talented people and let them do what they're good at and continue to excel over time. And so that was another big learning for me, is like, you know what? This is really about the people. It's not about the money is going to come, like it just will.
Yeah.
But it's about getting together a really great group of people and letting them do their thing, and as owners, we just have to not mess that up. So that was another big experience for me.
That's really interesting. It's like from where you started versus where you are now. It's like what job can get me a $300,000 house to like, oh, the money will come. It's like,
Yeah.
and you're probably, and it sounds like you're at peace with that. And like I feel it sounds like you're happier and like in a better place than you ever have been, at least from the stories that you've told.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. And, I think a lot of life is each day trying to find more peace day to day and whatever that means. It's different for all of us. But
Yeah.
the short answer is yes. And look, there are many things that impact that. Like I don't have the sort of uncertainties or the vulnerabilities. I don't feel like I need people to take me seriously and think that I'm really intelligent. I used to have those things all the time. Like we all have struggled through those things.
Mhm.
I could give a rat's ass now. Like
Mhm.
I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Again, the only people I care about are the only people that I day in and day out know that I can't screw up with are my 3 children and my wife. That's it. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's what's going to result in a good life for me. Now these ancillary things are important and help to sustain my family unit. But ultimately, like I don't have to prove anything to anyone. Like I feel like now I still have to perform and I still very much believe in treating people the right way, but I've dropped all those unnecessary thoughts and noise that I think many of us struggle with through many different parts of our career, especially earlier days. And man, let me tell you, that's a very freeing feeling. I feel like I do my best work now because I'm not worried about all these things, which really don't matter in the grand scheme.
How do you keep that perspective? I feel like that is a goal for so many people, but then you get into the day to day and it's hard to find that or hard to maintain that perspective. So, how do you do that?
Um, I think it looks a little bit different for everybody. I mean, my personality is a little bit different, as you could probably tell. Like, I'm very Midwestern, plain spoken, not
Mhm.
shy. Um, again, because I have an ego, of course, but like, I never think I'm the smartest person in the room, but I do think I'm probably, um, more knowledgeable than most, right? Like, and there's a difference between the two to me. Maybe intelligence and knowledge is maybe how I should say that. Like I'm much more focused on being an effective communicator now. And that's one thing you mentioned earlier, like things I've changed my mind about. I can't tell you how many times I used to be on meeting. We've all been on meetings with big groups of people and we've said like, okay, everybody got it. You know what you're supposed to do next? We're all on the same page about that, right? And then you walk out of the meeting and everyone's like, I don't know if I agree with that. Or like, what are you doing? Or
Mhm.
are we on the same page? Like, or my favorite thing, especially running sales teams, like running sales teams and you get out of the room with an account person who works for you, or maybe you're with a sales engineer and they're like, oh yeah, that went really well, didn't it? And then you say
Mm.
to your salesperson, like, yeah, it went well. But then in the back of your head, you're thinking like, I don't think it went that well. Right.
Yeah,
One of the
yeah.
Yeah.
biggest things is I joke now that I'm always happy to look like the dumb person on any given call. And
Yeah.
I tell all of the people who work for me over index on being explicit at the risk of sounding or appearing dumb because I can guarantee you everyone is having the same nagging thoughts in that meeting that you are. They're just too afraid to say something,
Well,
right?
that's bravery, right?
Yeah,
To
and
ask, you're not asking a dumb question. You're being brave enough to ask a question no one else is willing to.
I can't tell you how many times now I'll be in a meeting with people and I'm gonna be like, all right, I'm gonna say something, and at the end of it, I want all of you to look at me and tell me what you heard. And I want to make sure that we're in alignment
Yeah.
on that thing. And
Mhm.
we cannot leave this room until we're in alignment. And sometimes that alignment's more important than the message itself, right? But like that is one big failing in corporate America that I see uh incessantly is like how many times you walk out of a room thinking everyone's on the same page, but because no one was brave enough to ask, are we on the same page? That
Mm.
everything falls apart. And it was a total waste of time. That
Yeah.
happens all the time. So I'm always happy to ask the dumb questions. I'm always happy to, at the risk of looking dumb, to be very explicit, overly explicit, maybe elementary in the way that I talk to people. And it's all for the sake of, and I this term gets overused, but it's very strong, and I like it, is alignment. You have to have alignment with a group of people or a team or even coworkers so that you're moving together in the right direction and not working against one another. And that is another critical learning I've had. And that's something that I don't really care about. Like, I don't want to say something dumb in front of this group of people. Like, what are we here for? Let's make sure we
Yeah.
accomplish that. I don't care how dumb you think I
Related to
am.
that,
You can think whatever you want, right?
related to that, I think it was earlier on, gosh, even until a couple of years ago, being perceived as smart, capable, important, and having the right answers, like those were probably the four bullet points of how I perceived myself. Like whether it was even true or not in that snapshot, I needed people to think I was important, capable,
Yep.
smart.
Yep.
Probably in that order,
Yep.
right? Like as
Mm,
far as what I thought. And then I got to the point of like realizing this transition of you don't need to have the best answers. You probably the smartest person, the best person in that space, the best leader probably has the best questions, but you're too busy trying to have the right answers or be perceived as intelligent that you're afraid to ask those things, which is actually getting
mhm.
in the way of you being a leader. And like
And
that
being
was a
smart.
weird realization I had to have. And it's like it's ego driven, right? It's like, and then you have to smash that perception of what you
It's
think yourself is.
totally. It's ego driven. It's also very, I think it displays, especially as we're very young in our careers, that we're really worried about ourselves and how we're
Yeah.
perceived, right? And over time, especially as we are in charge of groups of people or the performance of groups, or comped on performance, I don't care what you think. We just need to accomplish the goal, right? Like, why do
Mhm.
we just need to move the ball forward? I tell people all the time that, like, I can't tell you how many of our clients, we have over 100 agencies that are clients today. And I don't talk to all of them, but I talk to some of them. And they get so wound around the pole about, is this the right decision? Is this the
Yeah.
best tool to use? Am I doing the right thing? And I'm like, I don't know why you're that concerned about it. Business is like blackjack. Win more hands than you lose. That's it. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
You're going to make mistakes, but you just need to make a little bit more money than you made the day before. And as long as you're not losing money on a consistent basis, you just keep rolling that ball up the hill. You're going to have really good days. You're going to have really bad days, but you got to make sure the ball keeps going up the hill. And so I just think people get so bogged down about these things that do not matter. And ultimately, life comes down to effort. Like, we only have so much energy to expend with our loved ones, on ourselves, or in a work environment. I don't want to waste it on things that don't matter, right? I don't have the capacity to do that, or at least I try not to have the capacity to do that. And so the more I can focus on moving that ball uphill, and the less I can worry about, am I doing it the right way, or did it go fast enough today, or what do people think about how I did it? Like, doesn't matter. It has no impact on, did we continue closer to our goal today or not? That's it. That's the only thing that matters to me, at least. Again, that's a very personal comment, I guess, but that's sort of where I've, resolved over the years.
I think it's a good perspective.
Yeah.
Um, we're coming to the end here, so we'll hit you with the wrap up question.
Yeah.
I guess do you want me to grab it or do you want it?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So you've had a really interesting past, really interesting life. Gosh, so many different things you've done in even a short period of time in the grand scheme of things. But if you were to go back and have dinner with yourself at like 18 or 25 years old, what advice, like what tweet do you tell that person to help guide yourself on your future path?
Well, it's obvious now probably, but it's to have that long time horizon and to not
Mhm.
worry about doing everything really quickly. Um, I just think that that inflicted a lot of unnecessary pain on my life and made things so much harder than they needed to be. And, what that boils down to probably is perspective. And perspective is usually only gained through experience. But for me, and again, this is not for everyone, because some people are capable of moving that fast and being that successful that quickly, or it just happens regardless, right?
Mhm.
But for someone like me, I wish I would have taken things a little bit slower and been more patient and been willing to make some mistakes in arenas where maybe the consequences were not as severe or painful. Now, at the same time, would I change the path I took? Not at all. I do the same
Yeah.
thing again, because I needed to learn those lessons in the way that I learned them. And I needed to have those experiences, and I needed to learn about myself in a way that made me more capable. And that was the only way I was going to do it, because that's the only way I learn, is through going back to instinct. Like, I'm kind of like, a blind person walking around in a room and banging up against all these walls, but eventually I'll know where they're all at, right? That's just kind of how I operate. So I had to do it that way. But if I could have saved myself a little pain, I would have tried to change that perspective at a younger age.
Yeah. Well,
Great
I think that's
answer.
really great perspective. And it's like, sometimes when you ask for something as punishment, you get it. Right. And I think you've had to experience that over time,
Yeah.
and it's shaped you to who you are today, which is like really an amazing story. And we really appreciate you coming on today to share it, talking about how Upsource was originated, the path it took to where it is today, where it's
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
hearing about how that tied into your whole past, your family life, learning that you're an accountant. Like, I think, man, I'd known you for 5 years before I knew that you had an accounting background, and it really surprised me. So
Yeah.
it's always fun to have those stories and those backgrounds. But Craig, thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining, man. We really appreciate it today.
No problem. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it.
Thank you.